Adrienne N. Breitfelder, City Clerk, you are hereby directed to call a special session of the City Council to be held on Monday, July 25th, 2022 at 6 p.m. in the Historic Federal Building for the purpose of conducting work sessions to receive updates on conceptual development in the Southport and the reuse study for the city-owned 5th Street site.
Thank you. Good evening, and welcome to a special session of the Dubuque City Council for July 25th, 2022. As a reminder to viewers and listeners, due to the nature of tonight's meeting topic, public input is not accepted. However, you may contact the City Council directly from the city's webpage at www.cityofdubuque.org/councilcontacts. Attendance for the session is as follows. Mayor Kavanaugh.
Here.
Council members Resnick.
Here.
Roussel.
Here.
Sprank.
Here.
Wethel.
Here.
City Manager Van Milligan. Here. City Attorney Brumwell.
Here.
Thank you.
Jill Connors, Economic Development Director here at the city. We're going to talk to you tonight and present some information about an EPA study that looked at the feasibility of a sports and entertainment complex on a site in the Northport. So just as a reminder, again, this is high level. This was meant to look at the feasibility of something. It's not a plan for anything. It's not committing anyone to spending any money. It's here just to give all of us an idea of whether could a concept like this work and could it work in this location. Here's a recap of what we're going to talk about tonight. We'll give you the genesis of the project. We'll show you some site development concepts, and then we'll talk about any next steps. Where this started, again, this seems to be a theme. We got an EPA technical assistance grant for the redevelopment of brownfield sites. Underneath of that grant and working with the consultant named Vita Nova, we needed to talk to them about what are some sites around the city of Dubuque that are brownfields. And starting with that, we identified several different properties that we could possibly study. And we landed on the 12-acre site that's down in the Northport, which many people around here call the ball field site because of its shape and past hopes and dreams. So that's the site that got selected. If there had been a different site selected to study, then we had a different use in mind because this type of a use of a sports facility would not have been appropriate, wouldn't have made sense on that site. So we chose this, and because of what we hear on a regular basis, just anecdotally or from developers calling our office or from parents who have middle school children in travel clubs for sports, it was apparent to us that there's interest in having a sports facility in town that could support local practice, tournaments. So that's what we decided to work on with the consultant, was that concept. So as I mentioned, Vita Nova was the initial consultant that we worked with, and then through the process, they brought on board the sports facilities companies. They have several dozen facilities across the United States that either they did a study on the front end and or they did the construction and or they helped manage and program what happens at those facilities. And they also performed the feasibility study for the Field of Dreams project. So they have experience here, and our main contact there, Joe Fackel, he's from the Quad Cities, and he understands the weather here, which was important to us, not from somewhere where it's warm all the time and you can have a really different concept when you're talking about a sports facility. Vita Nova sent a representative here last October, and we toured him around to see a variety of stakeholders so that we would really have a rich discussion from the different angles of folks who might have some sort of an interest in a sports and entertainment facility. So they met with city staff, We went over to Greater Dubuque Development and met with them, knowing that they represent the needs and understand the needs of companies here in town. We spoke with Conlin Construction Company, and one of the purposes of that was to make sure that we had real construction numbers for this market, that we didn't have Chicago numbers or New York numbers that they were trying to plug in to their feasibility study. We also met with representatives of Dubuque Initiatives, since they are a local economic development board. Kevin Lynch also represents the DRA, which we felt was a good connection as well, as they might want to align, like we just talked about. We also spoke with staff over at Travel Dubuque, since they have a pulse on who comes to town and why, and who doesn't come to town and why. And then we also worked with Ryan Peterson at RDG Planning, or consulted him because of all the planning work that he does. We felt that he would give some good input, knowing what he knows from other projects he works on. Some of the key takeaways of the study that they undertook. So let me talk about, maybe it's more helpful to explain to you first what the deliverable was for this grant. What they're meant to do is look at the site and the use that we proposed, and then come up with a pro forma, meaning coming up with what are the numbers, what's it going to cost to build something, how much money could you make on a regular basis if you built that particular thing. And they provided us with a very detailed Excel spreadsheet with multiple tabs, and we can go through and plug in the different numbers. If we were to create and want to think about a different use, we could go in and use that. So that was their deliverable to us, was this set of spreadsheets that we can use to kind of look through, oh, if there's a project coming to town, a developer proposes something, we can start to have that conversation with a developer, and then we can plug in some numbers from our end and go, okay, well, let's think about incentives that the city typically provides. Would that be enough to make a project pencil, or would it not? So that then becomes a tool to help us understand what we might want to consider on moving forward with any sort of project. All right, so one of the takeaways that the consultant came away with after those interviews that we just talked about was that the community is supportive of having new community facilities. Now here, it's specifically with respect to the initial capital needed. There's support there, but ongoing operations and management seems to be a concern that people have here. Related to community recreation facilities, we don't have one enclosed sports facility space, and it can be difficult for times to find practice and play opportunities. In particular, when we spoke with the Leisure Services Department staff and with the Travel Dubuque staff, they informed us that there's a lot of use of school gyms for indoor sports, but there's not enough. And then it's all dispersed throughout the city. And so in order to have a tournament come to town, you've got everybody running in all different directions, and it's just not conducive to attracting outside tournaments coming to town. They found that sports activities are run by nonprofit organizations here in town. They found out that the community surrounding the B branch is economically challenged and underserved from a recreation facility standpoint. And they understood from conversations with us that that area of town is a real priority for us to make sure we're being equitable in what we're able to serve. They also believed that the university system in town might be good partners based on their sports programs and facilities. More key takeaways from the work that was done. We also talked about an entertainment use, so not just sports facilities, but also could you incorporate, create something bigger, thinking big again, like was mentioned, not just going, okay, we can build this gym and stop there. The idea was, what if my kid's playing, in a basketball tournament, and I got a 6-year-old I got to do something with, maybe we come over here and there's a rock climbing wall, or maybe there's a restaurant that's right there that we can spend our time. So thinking about different uses that can all come together, so that got talked about. We talked about youth-oriented sports complex. One place that was mentioned was the TBK Sports Complex down in the Quad Cities. The Joe Fackel from the Sports Facilities Companies, he was involved in part of that planning down there. Now, keep in mind, that's probably not going to fit in our market. It's probably a lot bigger maybe than what Dubuque would need, but that would need to be sussed out in further study. We talked about hotel and hospitality. If you've got tournaments coming in, going to need hotel rooms. We talked about the family-focused entertainment, which is what I just mentioned, and that it be family-oriented. We also talked about the area of town in the North Port. We've got the parking ramp that's right there. We've got the planned apartment complex that's right there. And we've got train track that goes across 5th Street. So we talked about all those pieces and parts as part of our conversation. So the Sports Facilities Company. So we're back to Joe Fackel. And he met with Steve Sampson Brown and myself, as well as Jason White from Greater Dubuque Development. We had a coffee one morning, and then we're able to give Joe a tour of some of the areas of town, give him a sense of what is where, so he could think about, if, in that location, how does it interact with other areas of town? And then following that visit, he submitted a proposal to our office saying that one thing that their company could do for us is a market analysis, a financial analysis, and that they could facilitate some planning and strategy sessions. So we've got a proposal sitting in our office for that. And I'm going to have Steve Sampson Brown come back up and talk to you. Here's the site. He's going to talk to you a little bit more about the development concepts.
So we're looking at the 12-acre site permanently north of 5th Street. And again, Jill mentioned it's baseball shaped. We looked at it, again, as just what would fit, what's in the realm of possible. So the first concept Vita Nova developed was sports focused. So again, it's all those things you might envision in a holistic site. We talked a lot about what you would want to do, as Jill mentioned, when you're sitting there with your family and one of your young children are playing in a sports tournament, and then what would you want to do when you want to keep the rest of the family entertained, which is not always easy during tournament time, having done that as a parent myself. So need for indoor courts, whether it's a field to play long toss or small minor league baseball, not minor league as in professional, but young children to get out. Flexible court space, volleyball, maybe cheerleading tournaments, wrestling. We talked with Travel Dubuque about what type of tournaments. We also talked with Marie Ware and Dan Kroger to get their thoughts on what type of tournaments would be fit well for Dubuque and a facility of this scale. One thing I remember Travel Dubuque mentioned that there's teams from Milwaukee and Madison that drive by Dubuque every weekend heading down to the Betplex. So there is a market out there. And as Jill mentioned, one of the next logical steps might be to actually take a deeper dive into what is that market. But we're not here to talk about that tonight. So pickleball, of course, growing area of interest in the community and retiring generations. And my wife plays tennis a lot, and a lot of her friends are starting to have joint problems and things like that, and they've downsized from tennis to pickleball. So that's a naturally growing activity. Of course, hotel on campus. Downtown Dubuque has many reasons why it needs a hotel. There's been a lot of talk globally about the Field of Dreams development in Dyersville and how additional hotel space in Dubuque might support that. And then just some indoor games and fun activity space for everybody, both during sporting events and then maybe after 5 o'clock if you're staying overnight in a hotel. So that was more of an in-depth sports focus. Entertainment focus, I like to define this as, Dubuque's known for weddings, so where do you have your rehearsal dinner that's fun with the whole family on Friday night? Maybe it's at a facility that's entertainment focused. So a little bit more emphasis, same athletic concepts we looked at, same hotel idea, but maybe it's, we talked about what's unique about this facility, that why would somebody come here versus just stay in Lower Main Street or some of the other facilities the city has to offer. And we talked about some other town has some, I'll call it almost an adventure art, glow in the dark. So there's opportunities to create entertainment type things that don't currently exist in Dubuque and wouldn't compete with things that are already in Dubuque. Generally, just programmatically what we're looking at, so indoor soccer, softball fields on an athletic turf, approximately 120,000 square feet. Art entertainment venue, about 30,000 square feet. Sports entertainment area, about 30,000 square feet. What they call the restaurant row, which is just team hangout area. Light snacks, refreshments, about 70,000 square feet. So again, that's multiple use space, not just a single restaurant. And then just indoor athletics. So maybe there's, having been formerly involved in the Bowling and Beyond lease many years ago, the sand volleyball courts were very popular. And when that lease ended, courtside was the only opportunity for sand volleyball, and now they're not in town. So, perhaps there's a couple of sand volleyball and people, just like they play softball on Chaplain Schmidt Island after 5 o'clock, maybe there's a sand volleyball league that happens in this area. Clubhouse area, then just for scale, about a 200 key hotel is what we base the financial pro forma on. So as you can see, concept 1 versus concept 2, generally the numbers work out. So again, as Jill mentioned, the tool we need as staff is everyone talks about certain developments at certain properties, but since we're not constantly living in the world of private development, working with realistic construction numbers, we really needed this tool to be able to go up to the Bowling and Beyond site, or maybe the Southport, or maybe the south side of 16th Street, and put some numbers into this spreadsheet and figure out, hey, would a lease rate of X amount per year make sense here? Can there be a positive return? And then if we can figure that out, then maybe we, Jill and I and whoever's working as city staff, can use that as marketing information to attract developers from both in town and out of town. So, we're not a big enough city where people from Minneapolis and Milwaukee and Chicago are driving to Dubuque every weekend to check out investment opportunities. But if we can show them that there's investment opportunities that can be profitable, and we might be a way for them to diversify their portfolio, I think there's an opportunity here. Certainly, Dubuque's a great location, and we've heard that from all the people that we've interacted with, from the sports facilities to Vita Nova. They come to Dubuque, and they're like, this is an amazing place, and they recognize the river for the value it has, so, in the area communities. Again, just a screenshot of the realistic financial pro forma. So again, we're getting down into what are the square footage costs for a hotel, restaurant. Those numbers can all be changed as the economy changes and inflation goes up or down. So we can adjust those based on what makes sense. And then on the financial side, of course, how do you cash flow a whole development like this at a scale? So, we often hear about, and again, we all know there's no historic buildings in the Northport, but just to see the realistic, what do federal historic tax credits mean? What's the cash value to a project if those could be put in play? What are the state historic tax credits? What's their value? And then, of course, the new market tax credits. So one of the unique things about the sports facilities complex, especially if it has a public component, it would allow a developer to leverage new market tax credits. We did do our due diligence that far. So, and as you can see, the total cash value to a developer, or private developer, is in the $40 million range. So Having a sports facility as part of a larger development that has public access to the community, which is one of the triggers for new market tax credits, brings real value to a development site, whether it's here in the Northport or perhaps somewhere out in Dubuque, and now we can bring that attention to what it deserves. And I'll just say the other thing we mentioned from Vita Nova. So Vita Nova is a boutique firm out of generally New York City, but as their CEO jokes, no one's been into the office in 3 years, and he's got an 8-year lease, so they're still from New York City, but they all work remotely now with COVID. But they develop hard-to-develop brownfield sites, and they work in rural places. They've worked in rural Iowa. They've got a place where they're trying to, in northern Maine, where they're trying to help a community redevelop an abandoned paper plant. But they've also worked in large communities, St. Louis, things like that, and they work on the hardest sites. So they're very well suited to look at a place like the Northport. They understand potential contamination that can be found in urban areas, and how do you leverage site development to reduce development costs. It's another reason why we looked at the Southport initially for this conversation before we settled on the Northport. The other thing they mentioned is the River Museum, in terms of a traveling sports facility and people coming to the area for a weekend for a tournament. The River Museum is just a really huge asset to our community that not every other community has to keep kids entertained when they're bringing their families to town. So they really thought that was a great piece to leverage here in Dubuque. So with that, we just covered everything we'd like to talk to you about. If there's any questions, Jill and I would be happy to answer them.
Great. Thank you very much, Steve and Jill. Opening it up. Yeah, Mr. Spring.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. No real questions, just that this is something that I know many citizens have talked to me about. Many of my neighbors, they want something like this. They're tired of going out of town for sporting events, so yeah, this would be very nice in our neighborhood, so thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, Ms. Wetham.
Anyone on the council with me knows that these things really excite me. So particularly the idea of having those resources for my children, but for the children of my ward and the children of Dubuque. I think it's exciting to think about creating space that is for tournaments and to bring people into our city, because when people learn about how great Dubuque is, they want to come back. And then when they're looking for a job, they say, remember last year when we went to Dubuque for that tournament? How great was that city? And so I think it builds momentum, and there's not a dollar amount you can put on that. I have had feedback from constituents talking to me about facilities and going to facilities out of town that do end up not being well maintained and get run down. And so as we move forward in processes, potentially that's something that I know people have voiced to me, and that I think we would need to create the long-term plan to make sure that we put something in our beautiful port that is well maintained, that is well cared for. The other interest I have would be, how do we meet the needs of our downtown families? Whether that is somehow finding ways to share that space with after-school programs, children who are in need of those resources to keep them enriched. And so I think as we consider these things, and as I looked over this, and as I responded to constituents, those were the topics that I kind of fell on my head. So thank you so much, guys. This is great work.
And I think in our conversation with Joe Fackel, one of the things he talked about is the sports facilities currently manages, I think he said, over 40 facilities around the country, from, I think he mentioned, a 200-acre complex in Indiana all the way down to smaller scale. And what he mentioned to us is, a lot of times each development deal is different in a community. And sometimes when the community on the public side puts in more investment, they usually require more access as part of that deal. So he said we've seen it completely private funded, we've seen it fully public funded, and we've seen it something in between. And he said that's a good conversation to have. And if we ever get to a point where we can do more study, I think that would be great to learn some of the lessons from other communities that are already doing it.
You know, that point you just made, Steve, I think is the one that I've been thinking about and I think is really important because there's so many different ways that you can pull this off. It can be fully privately funded. It can be a private investment entirely, which I think a lot of the other facilities you're talking about are like. You know, that's the way that those have been structured. You know, the city might help with getting the development started like we do with regular development, or we might give the land or gift the land or sell the land for a low price or whatever. And then somebody takes it over individually as a private investor. But there are also ways that you can structure it where it's a partnership. And we've seen examples of that here that we can work with. But there are really good examples in other places that I'm sure we can find too to figure out what could work for us. I think it's the same thing it's similar, I should say, to the last discussion we had. I mean, this is entirely possible. And what you found here, if I'm not mistaken, is that it's entirely possible in this space, that it could work in a number of different ways.
Yeah, I guess me personally, moving throughout the community, I haven't really met a person that dislikes the idea of the sports complex. It's just about right-sizing it and making sure the funding's the right fit for Dubuque.
Yeah. You got away with words tonight. That was another very well said statement. Because I think that's entirely the truth. And, you know, and you mentioned, Jill, you mentioned earlier, you know, as we go into goal setting, I mean, one of the things that you think about is what's going on in the community. And you know, this idea of what has become called sports tourism, I think, is something that we very much live in right now. With the Field of Dreams development going on in Dyersville, that is, and we've talked about this a ton, that it's not just about Dyersville, it's about the region. And we have an opportunity here in Dubuque to be a part of that in a way that I think is really important, but then also very us, you know, who we are as a community and what is required for us as a community. It's not just about bringing in the folks from Milwaukee that are driving through right now. It's also about how do we serve, as Ms. Wethel mentioned, the people who live here, especially people who don't often have the easy access to this type of amenity. So I think this is, I mean, I very much appreciate having this, and I think it's great to have this idea of a pro forma that somebody can look at to be able to attract some of this investment and partnership in the way that we do. So thank you very much. Do we have any other comments before we close out? All right. Well, thank you, everyone, for the presentation tonight. We appreciate it. I don't think we have any other business. Is that correct? Okay. There being no further business, we will stand adjourned.